Hi, everyone. This is Lindsay O'Donnell with Threatpost, and I'm here today in Las Vegas at ENFUSE with Anthony di Bello. Anthony, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Lindsay.
Great. Well, this is a really fun and exciting conference so far. Can you, just to start, give us an introduction to yourself and kind of your role?
Sure. My role here at OpenText is Vice President of Strategic Development. What does that mean? My responsibilities really are focused on bringing together OpenText legal, security, and AI technology in such a way as to solve new problems for our customers.
Great. Well, I feel like AI is huge nowadays, so that must be a really interesting role.
It really is, and part of the reason we're so focused on bringing AI into our technologies is twofold. One, AI is really augmented degree of automation, leading to covering for the fact that there's not enough people in these fields, compliance, risk management, security, e-discovery, to do the task as they've been doing it for years. And as well, as we'll talk about, the compliance landscape has gotten so enormously complex that chasing one or the other mandate is a lost battle.
Right. It really is fragmented and difficult to deal with. And I know that's something that you really see from your perspective, dealing with that and dealing with customers who have to kind of grapple with that. I feel like data privacy and data security is a top issue that is coming up when it comes to regulations and laws and different levels of enforcement in that area. What are you seeing there, especially when it comes to kind of compliancy as well?
Well, the compliance landscape really has changed the way that all security, discovery, whatever have you, professionals have to approach their job. We work with global corporations who have locations across countries that are regulated wildly differently.
Right.
The most obvious is one whereby, if you think about the how the U.S. views data, we view it as free.
Right.
In Europe, that's not so much. In Europe, my data is my data, and I have certain rights attributed to that data. And I think what they're doing over in the EU and some of the various countries over in Europe is influencing very much how we have to start thinking about our own approach to privacy in the States.
Right. No, I think that's a really good point, and I feel as though we especially saw that with the implementation of GDPR and what those policies meant for companies with U.S. Subsidiaries and U.S. businesses. So that's a really good point, too. I mean, what were some of the lessons we learned from that?
Well, we learned a couple things. One, we learned there's not enough controls around data movement. So one of the largest concerns we talk to customers about is one whereby they need to manage a global operation, but they have constraints put in place by regulation. That is to say, we can conduct an operation in another country, but we need to use local resources as an example to view whatever the results might be, whether it be evidence for a legal case or an insider threat issue or whatever have you. It's really constraining the abilities for some of these teams to operate globally. So as vendors, a big effect has been one whereby we really need to rethink our architectures, and I'm not just talking OpenText. This is an industry issue, and how those architectures manage and move data through their usage. So in the security realm, that means security data related to machines in France needs to stay in France, even though that information security team might be in New York, as an example, or UK. So being able to conduct and create solutions in such a way as it provides a global benefit, but also conforms to the requirements of data movement is critical. On the other side, those very same regulations are causing a convergence in the market across what used to be disciplines that had little to do with one another, and specifically risk management, legal, and security are coming together through regulation. So if you look at something like GDPR, there's not only security requirements like the 72-hour breach response requirement within there. But there's also legal requirements in terms of what needs to be reported and how that needs to be reported and to whom, which is now less of a security problem. But in order to succeed in this mission, if legal and security in this example aren't talking together, compliance will be fraught with all sorts of perils in terms of trying to implement a process or procedure that can be audited and maintains whatever spirit of compliance they're looking to maintain based on wherever they might be located.
Right. Well, I mean, speaking of location, it's not even just across country to country, but I feel like there are now state and federal different types of regulation within the U.S. Take, for example, like CCPA and things like that. Do you see that being another compliancy issue for U.S.-based organizations?
Oh, it's an issue that if we look ahead, I don't think this issue will persist for long, in that I feel like we're forcing a national decision on privacy regulation. So, to your point, I think 49 or all 50 states have their own version of a privacy regulation to varying degrees of enforcement. I think, to point, California and Massachusetts have some of the strongest privacy regulations that might be most similar to GDPR. But given the fact that now with the CCPA, considering California is the largest state in the union, this is forcing a conversation now east in terms of, if California enacts this, that means anybody who's dealing with the information of any of these 30 million residents have to comply. We should be having this conversation at the national level, and that's to the point where we're seeing, without getting at all into politics, but we're seeing some candidates starting to talk about part of their platform being a national approach to data privacy, to the degree I think I saw, I can't remember which outlet I read this in, but there's some folks within government talking about a new agency designed to manage and control privacy and regulate some of the social media companies, etc., to that effect. Yeah,
well, that's a great first step. So
I think at this point it's a needed first step, to the point where if you're a European citizen, or if I'm a company anywhere in the world with a European citizen's data, I must comply now. Californians' data, I must comply. There's really no choice but to unify the frameworks. Otherwise, to the challenge of maintaining compliance with multiple mandates, we're just going to make the problem completely impossible for a business to solve in a way that's realistic or practical.
And we've been talking a lot about kind of location to location and the fragmentation there, but what about industry, different industries and kind of different sectors and how they have to comply with like HIPAA compliance and things like that? How is that kind of merging with the different tech issues we're seeing with privacy and security?
Those issues, those other kinds of regulations, so the HIPAA, PCI, another more industry-focused regulation, they're getting, and now are many similarities between these and GDPR, CCPA, whatever have you. I'm thinking of PCI compliance and even HIPAA. There's a mandate within there that says you can only store this kind of data for as long as it's useful to your business, and then you have to get rid of it. If I can comply with the right to be forgotten, that same approach should be able to comply with the right to, or the requirement to, eliminate other types of data from my environment. So here's where we try to help our clients understand what's that base level of commonality across all the regulations that your business, whether you're a hospital or a bank, are purview under, and start putting together a more holistic approach, people, processes, technology, to get the broadest level of compliance with the minimal amount of lift. This is, we're coming out of a place where, as new regulations were being released, lawyers, security teams, whatever, started to chase that regulation. I feel like we've gotten to the point where these regulations are flowing out so often now that, again, there will be a shift to aggregate these requirements in some way and help and enable a business to determine, to what degree in this aggregate layer should we or do we need to hit in order to meet that compliance? Though in the States, I see, at least amongst the large enterprise, their approach is less driven by compliance and more driven by what do we need to be truly secure, which drags the compliance requirements along with it in most cases.
Right.
And this is as opposed to an approach I see in Europe where we need to have compliance with this regulation. A little bit independent from the conversation of, well, what do we need as a unique business to ensure that against the unique threats we're facing, we're secure. So there's still a little risk and a disconnect between meeting the level of compliance and actually being secure that I think we'll also start to see closing as this is now becoming a global need, not even just a regional or state need. It's truly a global problem at this point.
Right. And I feel like compliancy kind of gets the true requirements that go into compliancy and what that means for different companies is very challenging, and that's something that kind of gets swept under the rug and that a lot of people don't think about. Can you talk a little bit about that and what's needed to go into compliancy efforts, especially for like a large enterprise?
I think to align with compliance in a way that will be practical and reasonable in implementation really starts with what I was saying a moment ago. Understand what are the unique threats your business face. Just because, maybe not the best example, but just because ransomware is the big thing in the news, that doesn't mean every business is going to be bothered by ransomware.
Right.
So to take the knee-jerk reaction of, oh, boss, ransomware, we need something for this.
Right.
Well, is this a threat that we're going to be worried about or just a threat? So what I'm getting to is one where we're seeing folks starting to better understand and ask that question. What's important to us and what are the threats that we're faced with? Let's design a program focused there and then look at the gaps between us being secure from our perspective and what compliance is asking us to do. So if we get to that base level of, you know what, we understand we're secure, we've designed a program based on our unique infrastructure, our unique threats, we've got the audit and testing trails, let's say, to demonstrate that this is all true. Okay, now what's the gap between GDPR and what we've accomplished to ensure that we're secure? I think is going to be the right approach, and that, again, chasing compliance requirements often leads the enterprise down rat holes that aren't necessarily or should be their biggest priority based on having not asked those other questions.
Right. No, that's a good point. Well, looking forward to 2020, do you think that we'll see any big trends, anything to watch out for when it comes to either compliancy or data privacy and security enforcement?
I think we will see some change in trends between now and 2020, if for no other reason than, you know, the let's say the political environment we're entering into in 2020 is forcing this conversation as a differentiator for various candidates,
right,
which I think is a good thing, and it's nice to finally see some of these folks articulating challenges and solutions around technology in a way that leads me to believe they're starting to really understand the role technology plays, which I wouldn't have said 6 years ago, 8 years ago.
Yeah.
So I think by virtue of that, we will start to see, you know, things coalesce around national data privacy. Will we see a new agency spring up from a regulatory perspective? I think that's an interesting question too, and I could see it going that way based on considering, you know, privacy and the need for privacy in an online arena no different than privacy in other areas that we've ensured a lack of anonymity, as an example.
Right.
You know, whether it be over phone communications or the mail or other methods of transmitting information that existed in the past. Those have all been regulated eventually.
Right.
I'd be surprised if we didn't start to take some measure of regulation around some of these platforms. And for lack of that, they may regulate themselves.
Well, Anthony, thank you so much for coming on and speaking to us, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
And thank you for taking the time to speak with me as well.
Great, thanks.